Hi, Bushi with the quick video covering the changes Picto received in 7.2. You may have heard by now rumours that motifs kinda suck, particularly hammer. This is mostly true, although as always there is some nuance. I will quickly point out that I called out the issues with this nerf muses buff filler approach to rebalancing all the way back in December, but clearly Square Enix doesn't have people who know how to check the math for their jobs. That aside, the too long didn't read version is that hammers are not worth using in odder minutes, and creature motifs aren't worth using unless you get a full loop ending with a Mogre or Medine. As for 2-minute burst hammers, there is a heavy it depends. The rest of this video will cover the methodology and numbers that lead to these conclusions, but that's the short version for those that just want like a quick answer. The first concept I want to introduce is expected value potency. In short, this is the given potency of a spell modified by some coefficient to account for your average chance of critting or direct hitting. Hammers are straightforward to calculate. Since they're guaranteed crit direct hit, you can just multiply by 1.25 for the direct hit, and then you can modify by whatever the crit modifier is for the gear that you have, which using the 2.5 biz for Picto that's posted at the moment is 1.614. There is also another additional multiplier based on your direct hit stat. This was added to buff direct hit a little bit a while back. You could just look this up, see what tier you are in for your direct hit on Allergan Studies, which for our purposes is 1.067. So multiplying these all together gives our hammers a modifier of a little over 2.15. For normal abilities, the math is a little bit more involved. First, we need to split our hits into those that direct hit and those that don't. And then for each of these, we further split them into the hits amongst those that crit and those that don't. And then for each portion, we are giving a proportional weight based on their chance of occurring. So we then apply the crit multiplier to the portions that crit, and then the direct hit modifier of 1.25 to the portions that direct hit. Adding all these together gives us a modifier that represents the average increase in damage we should expect from our crits and direct hits, which for us is a little under 1.24. The second concept I want to introduce is potency per second. This is essentially a way of, in a vacuum, assessing the relative strength of spells. It's functionally equivalent to damage per second, since damage is proportional to the expected value potency. Importantly for motifs, you must include their 4-second paint time in any potency per second calculation for fight downlines. Let's start with this simple example of painting a pom. Pom has an 800 base potency. Modifying this to account for expected crits and direct hits, it has 991.3. It takes 4 seconds to paint the motif, and the muse itself is off global, so we don't need to worry about casting time there. Thus, its potency per second is 991.3 divided by 4, giving us a little under 248 potency per second. For comparison, Fire in Red, our weakest filler spell, has a base potency now of 520, and an expected value potency of 644.3, and a recast time of 2.5, which gives a potency per second of a little under 258. This means that our weakest filler spell is stronger than painting and using one creature muse in isolation. The math for this changes for a complete loop of creature motifs though, since now you have, take an example of Pom, Wing, and then Mog, and then you're dividing this by 2 instances of 4 seconds, so 8 seconds. This is a potency per second of over 400, which obviously is stronger than the Fire in Red, and comparing it to a complete filler loop, so 6 RGB, 3 CUIM, and a comet, 400 is more than the 315-ish that you get from the filler loop. And we can see now that suddenly it becomes worthwhile to paint creature muses. It's from this analysis that we can draw the conclusion that creature motifs are only worth painting if you get to end in a Mogre or Medine. We can use a similar approach for hammers. The modified potencies for hammers are these, which sum together gives 3,358. The total cast time for this is 4 seconds for the painting, and then 3 2.5 second casts, giving a total of 11.5 seconds. This gives a potency per second of 292. This is notably lower than a complete loop of filler. It is also lower than the potency per second of Holy, which is 297.4. It would be very tempting here to conclude that it is therefore bad to ever paint hammers. This is not strictly accurate though. There are 3 ways hammer motifs could mitigate or fully overcome this loss and actually be stronger. The first is by providing more damage under buffs. The second is by delaying filler times to avoid a bad end to the fight, so ending up on an RGB or something. And the third is by enabling magenta skips. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to ignore the magenta skips since that's a bit involved and spreadsheety for general purpose advice. So let's first consider burst. Pre 7.2, Picto wanted to use all 3 hammers under burst to maximize the potency that benefited from buffs. With the nerf to hammer potencies though, we might want to reassess what the ideal burst looks like and then compare that with what a burst with no hammers looks like. The first thing to notice is that our first hammer hits for less than any of our subtractive spells. Now we can't trivially replace hammers with CYM spells due to their longer cast times, but what we can do is always end our burst on a comet since it is an instacast, so its longer recast time doesn't matter. We can also notice that our second hammer hit is weaker than all subtractive hits except Blizzard in Cyan, so with good sequencing we could maybe gain a bit more damage under buffs by replacing our second hammer hit with a Stoning Yellow or a Thunder in Magenta. This does come with a caveat though. The timing for this is significantly tighter. It's actually the same timing as the level 90 burst that I calculated ages ago for Legacy Ultimates for, DSR and stuff. With testing back then, I found it impossible to consistently get that burst without any spell speed, and I strongly preferred a 2.48 set. Apparently though, with frame alignment add-ons, it's possible to consistently get with 2.5, so, consider that how you want the spell speed or the third party tool. So, those are our options for hammer burst. What about non-hammer though? Well, an easy first step is to copy the single hammer hit burst and substitute the hammer hit for a holy, since they have the same recast time. We can see that this loses about 505 potency under buffs. So to decide whether it is worthwhile to use hammers under buffs, we can reframe the question. How many buffs do we need to make the 505 extra potency from the hammer burst offset the loss in potency caused by casting a hammer cycle rather than the filler? This is quite a complex question because how much you lose by casting hammer is dependent on what filler it's replacing. If it denies you the ability to cleanly end the fight on a completed subtractive line, then it's a significant loss. If, however, you are finishing the fight with holies because the alternative is like, say, an RGB cast, then that loss is significantly less. You can see here on this spreadsheet, I've tried to avoid too much spreadsheeting on this, but here on the spreadsheet you can see I've modeled out various scenarios for timelines of replacement stuff. For gaining a complete loop, you can see that you need over 50% raid buffs to offset the hammer casting. You can see, however, that this rapidly drops off. Using Holy in Burst also causes increased complications, as many of you will be familiar with the principle of skipping Holies back from before these changes. That still applies, by the way, to not delay gauge generation. So you've also got to do some accounting for that as well. If we wanted to avoid this, we could instead, rather than casting Holy, cast an RGB instead. I've got that on another spreadsheet here. As you can see, that drops the buff requirements a little more. So ultimately, what is the actionable advice we can draw from this? Well, as stated at the beginning, don't prep a creature muse if you will not get a Moggon redeemed by the end of the fight. Also, it doesn't seem to be worthwhile painting hammers for usage outside of burst. When it comes to burst itself, for the average player that doesn't want to spreadsheet fights and has unknown kill times and stuff, it probably makes sense to prep hammers for burst, spend the first hammer before burst, and then end the burst window on a comet. This avoids the tight timing of other burst options whilst also being very close to optimal. If either by using third-party tools or just having very good ping, you're confident in your ability to consistently do the tighter bursts, then you may wish to opt to skip burst hammers if you are in a low buff group, or if it is a longer fight. For optimizing beyond that, I'm afraid you will have to do your own spreadsheeting. Hopefully this has been useful for people and cleared up some of the confusion. I know it's not a nice concrete answer of you should always do this or this, but that's just the nature of these sorts of things. It's going to depend on like kill times and composition and things like that. So yeah, if you've noticed any flaws in my methodology or anything, let me know in the comments. If you appreciated this, found it useful, as always, do the like and subscribe thing. Yeah, and beyond that, thanks for watching, and go have fun in the Savages when they come out.